Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone has had a chance to enjoy your lunch. I would now like to welcome our keynote speaker. General C.Q. Brown, Jr. is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As chairman, he serves as the nation's highest-ranking military officer and the principal military advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. General Brown was commissioned in 1984 as a distinguished graduate of the ROTC program at Texas Tech University. He has served in a variety of positions at the squadron and wing levels and is a command pilot with more than 3,000 flying hours, including 130 combat hours. Notably, General Brown has commanded a fighter squadron, the United States Air Force Weapons School, 2 fighter wings, United States Air Force's Central Command, Pacific Air Forces, and served as Deputy Commander, United States Central Command. Prior to serving as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Brown was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Please help me welcome General C.Q. Brown.
Shortly after the use of nuclear weapons brought an end to World War II, Yale professor Bernard Brodie left his studies on naval power to focus on the effects of this new capability would bring to the world. In 1946, he published his paper, Implications for Military Policy, in which he wrote, "Thus far, the chief purpose of our military establishment has been to win wars. From now on, its chief purpose must be to avert them." Within years, the world found itself in a new reality as 2 nuclear-armed superpowers emerged, each with the capability to destroy each other. And thus began the 4-decade-long standoff known as the Cold War, as foreshadowed by Brodie's insight. Many of the components of deterrence theory that we use today are rooted in this period and are aimed at preventing conflict in nuclear war between superpowers. Today, the United States faces multiple adversaries. They're increasingly coordinating their efforts to reshape the international order. Emerging domains of space and cyber, all within a more complex information environment. With these developments, we must adapt our understanding and application of deterrence, or we risk strategic deterrence failure. First, I want to thank Tony Cotton for the invitation to address the Deterrence Symposium. For 15 years, this annual gathering has been the premier venue to promote open and candid discussions designed to inform approaches to solving strategic deterrence and assurance challenges. I want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Janelle Black for the introduction, and also want to thank the many other distinguished moderators, panelists, and guests here today, and to everyone who had a role in making this event possible. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We are in the midst of a mindset shift when it comes to how we think about deterrence. Some things haven't changed. The fundamental lessons learned from the 20th century still hold true. But some things are new. Instead of a bipolar world, we're facing multiple adversaries and malign actors that create an increasingly complex strategic environment, challenging our deterrence framework. We must be disciplined in our approach to deterrence, but also expand our perspectives. Not every action and behavior is deterrable, and adversaries may have strategic objectives that are so important to them that no deterrence approach would be effective. The 2022 National Defense Strategy lays out 4 top-level defense priorities, crucial for reinforcing deterrence and focusing the efforts of the Department and the Joint Force. Defend the homeland, deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies, and our partners, deter aggression and be prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary, and to build a resilient joint force a defense ecosystem, ensuring our future military advantage. And there are 5 challenges outlined in the National Defense Strategy: People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremists. You know, I've been the chairman for the past 10 and a half months, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, they are all active and somewhat more interconnected. Some have drawn parallels between the current situation and the 3-body problem we find in physics, where it's possible to calculate the outcome from 2 bodies interacting. But add a third, a fourth, or a fifth, and the results become more chaotic and unpredictable. Deterrence is not binary. Our adversaries may have more than one way to achieve the objective we are trying to deny. Deterrence is not static. Our adversaries are continuously looking for ways to design around the deterrence approaches that we use against them. These tectonic changes require adaptation in our strategic thought, operational art, and processes. This challenge calls for a comprehensive approach to deterrence that spans across multiple realms, incorporating conventional forces, addressing all domains: land, maritime, air, space, and cyber. We need a deterrence strategy that fits today's world, a more complex world of interconnected threats, which means our strategies need to be networked, dynamic, adaptable, and integrated. Integrated deterrence is a cornerstone of our national defense strategy, and it entails integration across domains, across regions, across spectrums of conflict, across the interagency, and across our allies and partners. Integrated deterrence means leveraging all powers of our nation, aligning our policies, operations, activities, and investments, and adapting our efforts to specific competitions, specific competitors as a holistic deterrence strategy. What is old is new again, and what is new is further complicated by emerging domains and technology. We need a deterrence strategy to be integrated by design to deal with these modern challenges. And I would argue we need to be faster at developing and applying our new framework. We need to act with urgency now, before we find ourselves needing to innovate in the midst of a major conflict. We need to act like we're in crisis before the crisis. I believe there are 3 areas we need to understand to achieve effective deterrence: our adversaries' cognition and culture, the ever-evolving information environment, and the impacts of advancing technology. Now, we're all likely familiar with the phrase, "beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Similarly, deterrence is in the minds of our adversaries. At its core, deterrence is based on our adversaries' perceptions of how these perceptions influence decisions on risk and rewards of conflict in the pursuit of their national interests. But in determining these perceptions lies the challenge. To accomplish this, we must understand the culture of our adversaries, their view of history, their collective values, and the semantics of their language. History, values, and semantics can influence the perception of a deterrence message, but there is an equation to deterrence. No matter the history, values, or semantics, the math equation stays the same. Deterrence is achieved when the perceived cost and risk of an action are greater than what is gained by committing the action. But different groups assign different values to their variables for costs, risk, and gains. They vary between countries, between regions, and between cultures. And in determining at what point cost and risk exceed gains varies. It's important we understand our adversary's strategic perspective and how they view their priorities, their values, and their place in the world. Do they believe that they're isolated, threatened, ascending, or in decline? And we must assess our adversary's values, goals, risk tolerances, and decision-making calculus to truly understand how to deter them. Some of our adversaries are analytical in their approach. Similar to an algebra problem, these adversaries are always trying to solve for X before moving forward. If we understand an adversary's X variable, we can impact that variable and ensure they are never confident in solving for X, therefore delaying their ability to act. If we don't understand their X variables, don't understand their strategic perspective, don't understand how they perceive the world and make decisions, we risk mirror imaging, leading to missed opportunities or unnecessary escalations. Before, as it was mentioned by Lieutenant Colonel Black, I had the opportunity to serve as a commander for Pacific Air Forces. And one of the things that I would get together with the staff, particularly our planning staff at the Air Operations Center, on a weekly basis to look at our missions that we're planning, particularly our bomber missions that would fly through the Indo-Pacific. And on the slide, it would typically actually have, when this mission occurs, this is what the PRC is going to, this will stick it to them, essentially was what it was saying. And I said, how do you know? Do they even know what we're doing? Do they care? And how do they show that they care? That to me was important because I thought we were missing our mark because we didn't really understand our adversary. And so we need to ensure we're not confusing our operations and activities with effective deterrence. Having credible combat capability is most important, complemented by our operations and activities. Operations, activities, and investments in the name of deterrence without evidence that these actions are changing the perception of our adversaries is activity without productivity. It's easy to do many things and say they are deterring the adversary. It is much harder to decipher and focus on what really has an impact. But that is exactly what we need to do. We need to develop deeper and more continuous productive channels of communication and evaluation with the intelligence community, with think tanks, and with academia. The experts who are best placed to systematically assess adversary leadership's perceptions and how they evolve. We must do this in order to understand our adversary's goals, decision-making calculus, and risk tolerances to truly understand how best to deter. Doing so in advance ensures we design our operations and activities to have the maximum deterrent effect. Cognition and culture determines how adversaries perceive information. Rapid technology has changed the way we receive information. We've seen a revolution in communication technology which has forever changed the information environment. The increased speed and advancing means of communication over recent decades have complicated efforts to message U.S. commitments, interest, and resolve in a coherent and purposeful manner. And there's no point in having a deterrent if its existence is not effectively communicated. The multitude of actors in the information environment, disinformation being one of them, have created a more complex environment for diplomatic and military leaders. We live in an era where the U.S. deterrence messaging can potentially be undermined through cyber operations and information warfare, complicating the task of maintaining credible deterrence. In global information ecosystems, fragmentation has made it increasingly more difficult to project a unified stance. We not only need to have the appropriate message, but we need to also move at the pace of the digital world. These dynamics require an unprecedented level of coordination to ensure the United States' messages, in coordination with our allies and partners, are not only heard, but are also accurately interpreted to achieve the desired deterrent effect. Because effective deterrence relies on protecting our national and global interests through the effective communication of both consequences and assurances. Now, beyond the intricacies of the information environment, we also face significant shifts caused by advancing technology. We've seen how the proliferation of new capabilities among state and non-state actors has changed the character of war. This has increased the intricacy of deterrence, making it crucial to anticipate and adapt to emerging threats across all domains. New technologies have potential to shorten viable response times in the event of an attack, changing the calculus and challenging the equilibrium on which global security relies. Artificial intelligence can greatly enhance awareness and access to information, but its effects on strategic decisions and responses are still yet to be determined. The changes in the technological environment demand modernization of our force, along with policies that enable their effective use. We may not elect to use an emerging technology in a certain way due to our values and our policies, although our adversaries might not have the same perspective. We need to collectively deepen our understanding of the emerging technologies, both the opportunities and the vulnerabilities, so we can shape the international norms of behavior. This includes leveraging the work being done in our academic institutions, such as the Stanford Emerging Technology Review, which strives to forecast and communicate these arising capabilities to policymakers. This collaborative approach allows us to fully understand and utilize these emerging capabilities. Because to be effective, deterrence must move at the pace of technology, and the policy needs to move at the same pace. Recognizing this, our force have made critical strides in modernizing our nuclear triad, command and control, and communications. We are in the midst of a historic generational overhaul of all of our nuclear deterrent capabilities, with the introduction of the Sentinel program, long-range standoff weapon, the B-21 bomber, and the Columbia-class submarine, all while keeping our legacy systems safe, secure, and effective. And as we modernize, we must also leverage every instrument of our national power into a holistic approach, addressing threats across all domains, land, maritime, air, space, and cyber, to establish a framework of integrated deterrence. Our approach must be comprehensive and integrated. I do have a chance to read something other than intel reports, and I recently finished the book by former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates entitled Exercise of Power, where he discusses the need to integrate all elements of national strength into a holistic approach to achieve our strategic objectives. Our role in integrated deterrence begins at the joint level, requiring seamless alignment across all services to be effective. But integrated deterrence is not just about possessing advanced technology and superior firepower. That is just one part of the orchestra. But truly integrated deterrence, we must harness the full power of government, drawing on all of the interagency capabilities and aligning our national strengths to create what Secretary Gates has called a symphony of power. The symphony is defined as an elaborate musical composition for a full orchestra. The symphony of power requires all the instruments, diplomatic, informational, economic, along with our military force operating in harmony. Leveraging all of our national instruments and coordinating with our allies and partners ensures that we deter threats comprehensively, securing peace and stability in an increasingly complex world. By coordinating across our alliances and partnership network with the United States and around the world, we create a deterrent strategy that is dynamic, adaptable, and resilient. Almost 80 years ago, Bernard Brodie astutely recognized the advent of nuclear weapons and had forever changed the dynamics of military force. And as technologies continue to advance, his insight reminds us the nature of deterrence must also evolve to address the changing landscape of the modern world. The complexity of today's global security environment necessitates an integrated approach where the deterrent effects of both nuclear and conventional power must work in unison. This is critical as we respond to the multifaceted threats posed by state and non-state actors alike. I know I don't have all the answers of how we should approach strategic deterrence amidst global transformation, but there are some steps I think we must take. We must deeply understand the culture and cognition of those we aim to deter. We must adapt to the increasingly complex information environment. We must keep pace both in technology and in policy. We must collaborate closely with our interagency partners, coordinating our collective resources and intelligence into strengthening our aligned approach. And we must utilize all instruments of government, whether through the precise application of hard power, the deliberate influence of soft power, or the seamless integration of both. And by taking these steps, along with our allies and partners, we forge an integrated deterrence, a symphony of power. And through that symphony of power, we ensure a future where deterrence prevails, safeguarding peace and security for all. Thanks again for allowing me to be with you today. I look forward to your questions, but more importantly, I look forward to the continued discussion on deterrence. Thank you. I told there was going to be questions.
There's an opportunity for someone.
No, someone's got a mic back there.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Christine. I'm really interested in, all the concepts we developed during the Cold War, like second strike, damage limitation, escalation management, and so forth. I'm really interested in how we think about such concepts in a tripolar superpower context, because this is kind of unprecedented for everyone.
Well, that's, matter of fact, I was just having a conversation yesterday about escalation management based on real-world events today. It's much more complicated. And that's why when I talked about the two-body problem versus the three-body problem, and now you add a third, fourth, fifth, and non-state actors that add to this, it does make it very complicated. I tell you, the one thing that after events happen in the Middle East, the thing that I told my staff is, after Hamas went into Israel, it opened up windows of opportunity from a number of different entities. For Hamas, for Lebanese Hezbollah, for Iran, the Iran-aligned militia groups, for the Houthis, for the United States, for the allies and partners. And I think the same thing occurs when you start thinking about escalation management as you move forward. The world is much more complex, and it's not as simple as it was during the Cold War. And so you can't necessarily take the Cold War model and apply it on and lay it on to today. I think that's a good foundation to start the conversation, but we got to be able to adapt and think a bit more broadly about how we would do this in the future. And so one of the areas that I've asked our J7 and the Joint Staff to think about as we look at how we do our military education is how do we put more deterrence theory into our approach, but also this piece of culture and cognition. And you're going to have a speaker after me in one of the breakouts to talk about culture. That was the thing I really felt about when I was there as a commander of Pacific Air Forces. We have a playbook, but that same playbook does not work across all of our adversaries. And I'm a huge NFL fan, so it's the same thing. The team doesn't run the same playbook every week. They study their opponent, and they adjust their playbook based on the opponent. That's what we got to be able to do to start thinking about deterrence and escalation management in the future. Thanks for the question. I think you're bringing your mic right behind you.
Sir, do we need structural changes similar to the National Security Act of 1947 or 48 in order to effect the changes necessary to implement the whole of government approach, given the technological changes and the need for speed that you articulated? Thank you.
That's a good question. There are some things we're going to have to put in place, whether it's going to be something like the National Security Act of 1947. I think there's some things we're going to have to do is actually put back together some things that we tore apart after the wall came down. I was just in one of the war games that was run by our J7. We had someone from FEMA, and we talked about our national mobilization apparatus that we had during the Cold War. And much of that we tore down because we said we didn't need it anymore. How are we doing? So the point there is, how do we start that piece again? And that was part of this book by Secretary Gates. He does talk about that, particularly in the last chapter, with some recommendations and how we need to stand up some structures like we had in the past. The world is moving so much more quickly, but we can't let it be weighed down in bureaucracy. We got to be able to move pretty quickly as well. And this is why I think it's so important that we have relationships across the interagency with our allies and partners, because when a crisis happens, we got to be able to move very quickly. And I'm a big believer in tabletop exercises and war games to force us to think. The challenge I have is when we finish those, everybody has a great idea, and then we go back to our regularly scheduled program after the event, and then we forget everything we just learned until we have a crisis and go, oh yeah, remember that board game we had? Those are the kinds of things we got to put in place. We do have to build out a bit more structure, I do think, in the future to make sure we are best postured, not just in the United States, but with our allies and partners as well. Thank you.
Sir.
Yeah.
Hi, Todd Robinson. I'm a professor with the School of Advanced Nuclear Deterrence Studies, or SAMS, down at Maxwell Air Force Base. I'm really thankful that you mentioned the three-body problem analogy. It's something that I talk about a lot with my students. And one of the observations that I tend to make is that the difference between the astronomical version of this problem and what we face today is that these bodies don't have agency over their decisions as far as position, orbital dynamics, et cetera. So how can we take advantage of the fact that the individual countries involved in this geopolitical competition have agency over what they do, how they do it, when they do it, et cetera, so that we can avoid the crash that the three-body problem tends to predict?
I think one of the key areas here is actually, for those that have agency, part of this is actually how do we engage not only with our allies and partners, but also with our adversaries. Because that conversation actually gives us insight and also gives us an opportunity to influence. And I'll use my experiences when I was the air component commander during the Defeat ISIS campaign. When the Russians came into Syria, the first thing we got shortly thereafter was a unclassified phone line and a Gmail account. And that's how we communicate with the Russians on a regular basis. And I could tell what was on the Russians' mind based on the questions they would ask. I never spoke to the Russians. I had an 06 that did it. I felt like a used car salesman. Because he would come to me each day and say, I'm going to talk to the Russians today. What do you want to tell them? And he would talk to them, and they'd come back and ask a question, and I would come back and tell them, okay, tell them this. So, so it's almost like buying a used car. But the point was, they would ask the same question over several days. That was an indicator to me. And those are the things that you can understand and then influence. I talked about the variables. Then you start to influence where they have agency, so we can actually go in a positive direction. I don't know that any of our adversaries are all looking for a major conflict. They have their national interests. But we also need to understand what those are so we actually can influence in a positive manner and not step on a great miscalculation or mirror image. And I think that's an important aspect that, again, why I think, aspect of culture and bringing those in. If we don't have it, bring somebody in who does to help us work through this. And I think that's an important aspect that we got to continue to do. Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much. I really appreciate your vision and leadership on these issues, and thinking back to your seminal op-ed, Washington Post op-ed a few years ago on redefining military readiness. What do you see as the challenges to adapting to new opportunities, new challenges, and adapting our readiness and our capabilities and our policy? Is it culture? Is it funding? Is it acquisition processes? What's the long pole in the tent in your view?
I guess the easy answer would be say all of the above. I think the main answer I would give you is a shared perspective. And I'll go back to my time when I went out to be the commander of Pacific Air Force. I had spent a lot of time in the United States Central Command. I'd served 2 tours in Korea, had not paid as much time paying attention to the Indo-Pacific until I went to become the commander of Pacific Air Forces. I would come back to Washington, D.C. and start talking about the PRC as if I was, coming from a foreign planet, because people weren't paying attention to it. We're in a different world today. I see the same thing with our allies and partners in the region, where we are much better aligned than we were 6 years ago. Those are the kinds of things that actually, you got to understand that we got a problem that we got to all work through together. That gains energy to move forward. Good example is, NATO. NATO is stronger than it's ever been, not just because it's 2 countries larger, but the fact that you have more nations giving 2% of GDP, in addition to they're working more closely together. The dialogue is more important because you have something that you can all focus on because of the threat from Russia going into Ukraine. Those are the things that we've got to do to help drive ourselves to say we've got to do some things to move forward. And we've got to acknowledge that, and that it takes leadership. And that's where my focus is. Hopefully that's where a lot of you are as well, that we're all focused on this because deterrence is so important. We never want to get to a major conflict. But if we do, I want to, I don't, personally, professionally, I do not play for second place. I want to make sure we win. Okay? I want to do everything we can to be as ready as possible. Last, since you mentioned the op-ed, one of the things I am focused on from a readiness perspective is we tend to look at readiness by individual force elements or force capabilities. You know, whether it's a bomber, whether it's a submarine, or an armor unit. But how do I look at the capability across a mission set? And so that's something I'm working with the Joint Staff on. In one area that I have a lot of expertise in is integrated air and missile defense, which all the services have a role in. So how do you look at the readiness? Because you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so it's important that we think through the readiness of what we're trying to achieve and how we use that from a deterrent standpoint. Because credible combat capability is important. The activity is important, but you know, you can have a lot of activity, but if it's not productive and you can't use it in a conflict, you're not going to deter. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Dr. Justin Anderson, National Defense University Center for the Study of Weapons of Mass Destruction. You noted in your remarks that there is no point in having a deterrent if its existence is not effectively communicated. And then you also noted that deterrence communication, U.S. deterrence communication, faces cyber and other informational environment challenges. So I wanted to follow up and ask you in the last 10 months if you have thoughts on ways in which our deterrence messaging can be made stronger, and or are there different ways we should think about doing deterrence messaging given some of the information environment changes you noted in your address? Thank you.
Now, part of it is the aspect of how, not only what we do, but how we talk about what we do. And sometimes not even talking about what we do, just making sure it's seen. You know, one of the things I did find, particularly with the PRC, is if you're, and maybe I would say the same maybe with some of their other adversaries, if you're too public and vocal about it, then they feel like they've got to respond publicly and vocal. Sometimes just our activity being noticed is enough to actually send a message. And those are the things we've got to be nuanced about it. And that's the part I think we've really got to work through is not just having activity, but also thinking about the activity, what we say about it, what we don't say about it, how it's communicated, how it's received, how it provides a level of assurance to our allies and partners, but also how it sends a message to our adversaries. That takes thought, and we need to be thinking about that before we get to the event where we're actually going to go do something and then figure out, okay, what are we going to say about it? You know, those are the things that we've got to think about, or what we're not going to say about it, and how we communicate it. I think the other part of this is also the analysis that we have to do after the fact. Because after we do something, how is that being received? And is the message we sent that we intend to send, was it actually received and interpreted the way we had hoped? And that's a part that, you know, I don't know that we do that as well as we probably could. And then the last thing, and I kind of mentioned in my remarks, and this is something I was doing when I was the commander of Pacific Air Forces, was before we go do something, how about we talk to some people to say, is this going to have an effect before we go do it? Or how do we adjust it so it has the most effect to communicate from a deterrent value standpoint, because this is the way we think it's going to be received based on some experts that spend time studying the other side and have more depth than we do. Thanks for the question. You're my hook, right? I was looking at my watch. No, I think I'm over time. First of all, let me thank you all again for the opportunity just to spend just a little bit of time with you and share a few thoughts on deterrence. This is something I really do think about a lot. I am a war fighter, but the goal is not to go to war, just like Brody said. And the work that you do here by being here at this symposium and the number of people that are here shows the interest that we have on this particular topic. We have the most respected, most lethal combat force in the world, but we cannot rest on our laurels. It's not going to deter all the time. We got to be thoughtful of our approach, and again, I just thank you for your interest in this and giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. Thank you.